The German tank officer commanding the Tiger never detected the approaching threat. There was no detonation, no blast radius, merely a whisper of metal slicing through air, followed by absolute quietness within the turret chamber. His artillery specialist collapsed onto the controls, lifeless. A rod composed of tungsten, narrower than an adult finger, had sliced completely through 100 millimeters of German armored plating traveling at 1,200 meters every second. The puncture in the protective steel appeared surgical and exact, roughly matching a bottle stopper's dimensions. Beyond the vehicle, the British Sherman Firefly's weapon operator prepared another round. The crew possessed no visual confirmation of the devastation occurring inside their target. Their sole indicator was the enemy turret ceasing all movement. This engagement unfolded during July of 1944 within the Normandy battlegrounds. The armament that terminated those German soldiers' lives had not existed half a year earlier. British military forces designated it APDS, representing armor-piercing discarding sabot technology, featuring a 50mm tungsten projectile encased within an aluminum sleeve that separated instantly upon barrel exit. What persisted was pure physics, combining mass with velocity, and a 76.2mm cannon boring through supposedly impervious steel barriers. Yet the peculiar element remains that the Tiger's internal crew never realized they were being targeted by enemy forces. The projectile reached its destination faster than acoustic waves could travel. No muzzle illumination, no advance notice, simply a slender tungsten carbide rod moving at velocities that transformed solid metal into something resembling liquid. This narrative chronicles the phantom projectile, a weapon so rapid and accurate that armored vehicle crews documented being penetrated without auditory recognition of impact. A technology birthed from urgent necessity, molded by tungsten material restrictions, and accountable for revolutionizing armored combat permanently. The German military possessed their own variant. Soviet forces attempted replication. American military struggled with precision challenges. However, British engineers achieved mastery initially. During the summer months of 1944, German tank operators absorbed a horrifying reality. Even their mighty Tiger offered no guaranteed protection anymore. Understanding this account becomes essential because what you will learn transformed everything. Military strategists believed regarding armor thickness, projectile speed, and battlefield survival. By the opening months of 1943, British military intelligence confronted an unavoidable dilemma. German heavy armored vehicles, specifically Tigers and Panthers, materialized across every combat theater. Their forward-facing armor measured 100 millimeters in thickness, occasionally exceeding that dimension. Conventional British anti-tank cannons lacked penetration capability beyond 500 meters distance. The 6-pounder artillery piece, representing the cornerstone of British tank destroyer units, deflected shells off Tiger exterior hulls comparable to small stones bouncing off solid barriers. Design specialists at the Armaments Research Facility located in Woolwich encountered a merciless mathematical problem. Enlarging cannon dimensions required complete tank chassis redesigns. Such undertakings demanded years of development, yet projectile velocity could be enhanced immediately. The underlying principle was not revolutionary. French military engineers had conducted experiments with subcaliber ammunition prior to the 1940 Armistice Agreement. Their concept involved encasing a compact tungsten core within a lightweight aluminum shell, launching it at extreme velocities, focusing all kinetic force upon a minimal impact zone. Two British designers, identified as Permutter and Coppock, advanced this concept between 1941 and 1944. Their breakthrough proved radical in nature. Engineer the exterior shell to separate itself immediately following barrel departure. The tungsten penetrator would proceed independently, sustaining velocity without aerodynamic resistance from the bulky sabot. This innovation resolved every challenge except one critical factor. Tungsten remained extraordinarily scarce. Germany maintained control over Spanish and Portuguese mining operations through economic leverage. Until mid-1944, Britain possessed severely limited reserves. Every APDS round consumed precious tungsten carbide, identical material required for precision machine tooling that manufactured the tanks, aircraft, and weapons securing victory. Manufacturing had to remain restricted. Most British tank crews received merely 5 to 6 APDS rounds per vehicle until late 1944. Their remaining ammunition supplies consisted of conventional armor-piercing shells, yet those limited rounds possessed tiger-killing capability at previously impossible engagement distances. Initial combat evaluations occurred during mid-1944. Sherman Fireflies equipped with the 17-pounder cannon received limited APDS ammunition stocks. They prepared to encounter German armor throughout Normandy. The question was not whether APDS could achieve penetration. The genuine question was whether British gunners could strike their targets before German 88mm guns eliminated them first. The manufacturing facility at Woolwich Arsenal carried the aroma of lubricating oil and metallic particles. Design specialists examined a problem that contradicted traditional physics principles. How do you enable a 17-pounder cannon to pierce 200 millimeters of armor without increasing its dimensions? The solution resided in mathematical calculations. A full-caliber 76.2mm tungsten core proved excessively heavy. It could not reach the necessary velocity. However, a 50mm core wrapped within an aluminum shell matching the gun's bore diameter weighed 50% less. Identical propellant charge, double the velocity. Muzzle velocity reached 1,200 meters per second. The sabot itself represented engineering excellence. 3 aluminum segments surrounded the tungsten penetrator. They required rifling engagement, spin transfer for projectile stabilization, then clean separation milliseconds after exiting the barrel. Premature separation compromised accuracy. Delayed separation eliminated velocity through drag. Early testing during 1943 produced catastrophic failures. The sabot segment struck the MPI Part 1. The German tank officer controlling the massive Tiger notices nothing unusual before disaster strikes. There exists no thunderous detonation, no violent shock wave rippling through the air, merely a faint metallic hiss followed by absolute quietness within the fighting compartment. His artillery specialist collapses onto the controls without warning, lifeless. A slender tungsten projectile, narrower than an average human finger, has sliced effortlessly through 100 millimeters of reinforced German armored plating while traveling at 1,200 meters every second. The puncture left in the hardened steel appears surgical in its precision, roughly equivalent to a bottle stopper's diameter. Beyond the vehicle, the British Sherman Firefly's barrel begins its reload sequence. The Allied crew cannot observe the carnage they've created inside their enemy's war machine. Their sole confirmation comes from watching the enemy turret cease all movement. This moment unfolds during July of 1944 across the battlefields of Normandy. The armament that just terminated those German soldiers didn't exist half a year earlier in any arsenal anywhere on Earth. The British military establishment designates it APDS, standing for Armor-Piercing Discarding Sabot, essentially a 50mm tungsten penetrator enclosed within an aluminum casing that separates and falls away the instant the round exits the gun barrel. What continues forward represents pure physics in action, combining mass with velocity to create a 76.2mm gun capable of punching through steel previously considered impossible to breach. Yet here emerges the truly disturbing element of this technological breakthrough. The Tiger's crew members seated inside their supposedly invincible fortress never realized they had become targets of engagement. The projectile arrived traveling faster than sound waves could propagate through the atmosphere. No visible muzzle flash warned them. No audible alert preceded their doom. Just a thin rod composed of tungsten carbide traveling at velocities that transform solid metal barriers into substances behaving like liquid water. This represents the chronicle of the Phantom Round, a weapon system so rapid and so accurate that armored vehicle crews documented being penetrated without ever hearing the actual impact occurrence. A technology conceived from absolute desperation, molded by severe tungsten material shortages, and ultimately responsible for transforming armored combat doctrine forever across every theater of war. The German forces possessed their own variant of subcaliber ammunition. The Soviet military attempted reverse engineering and copying the design. The American Ordnance Department struggled continuously with accuracy problems and consistency issues. But the British weapons researchers perfected the concept first, and during the summer months of 1944, German armored vehicle operators learned a terrifying reality that shattered their confidence. Even the mighty Tiger, previously considered untouchable, wasn't secure anymore against this new threat. Remain attentive to this narrative because what you're preparing to discover altered everything. Military strategists believed they understood about protective armor, projectile speed, and battlefield survival. By the early months of 1943, British military intelligence confronted a crisis they could no longer disregard or minimize. German heavy armored vehicles, specifically Tigers and Panthers, were manifesting on every combat front across Europe and North Africa. Their frontal protective plating measured 100 millimeters in thickness, occasionally substantially more depending on the specific model. Standard British anti-tank weapon systems couldn't achieve penetration beyond 500 meters effective range. The 6-pounder gun, representing the backbone of British tank destroyer units, bounced shells harmlessly off Tiger hull surfaces like small stones striking a concrete barrier. Engineers stationed at the Armaments Research Department located in Woolwich confronted a merciless mathematical equation with no easy solutions. You cannot manufacture guns significantly larger without completely redesigning entire tank chassis structures and suspension systems. That process consumes years of development time and testing. However, you can engineer projectiles that travel considerably faster, concentrating kinetic energy into smaller impact points. The underlying concept wasn't revolutionary or unprecedented. French weapons engineers had conducted experiments with subcaliber ammunition before the 1940 armistice forced France's surrender and occupation. Their fundamental idea involved wrapping a small tungsten core within a lightweight aluminum shell casing, firing it at extreme velocity, and concentrating all that kinetic energy onto a minuscule impact point for maximum armor penetration. Two British designers, identified as Permutter and Coppock, advanced this concept further between 1941 and 1944 through extensive testing and refinement. Their innovation proved genuinely radical in its simplicity and effectiveness. Construct the outer shell so it discards itself immediately upon leaving the gun barrel. The tungsten penetrator would continue traveling alone, maintaining velocity without aerodynamic drag from the bulky sabot casing slowing it down. This engineering solution resolved every technical challenge except for one critical obstacle. Tungsten remained desperately scarce throughout the Allied supply chains. Germany controlled Spanish and Portuguese mining operations through economic pressure and diplomatic manipulation. Until the middle months of 1944, Britain possessed extremely limited tungsten reserves for weapons production. Every APDS round manufactured consumed precious tungsten carbide, the identical material desperately needed for precision machine tools that fabricated the tanks, aircraft, and weapon systems actually winning the war effort. Production quantities had to be severely restricted and rationed. Most British armored vehicle crews received only 5 to 6 APDS rounds per vehicle until late 1944 arrived. The remainder of their ammunition storage consisted of conventional armor-piercing shells with explosive fillers. But those few tungsten rounds they did possess could eliminate a Tiger at engagement ranges previously deemed impossible by all tactical doctrine. Initial combat trials occurred during mid-1944 across multiple testing scenarios. Sherman Fireflies mounting the 17-pounder gun received equipment with limited APDS ammunition stocks as they prepared for the Normandy invasion. They were preparing to encounter German armor across the hedgerow country of France. The fundamental question wasn't whether APDS could achieve penetration against heavy armor. Extensive testing had confirmed that capability. The real question was whether British gunners could successfully hit their targets before German 88mm guns killed them first in the deadly exchange of fire. The manufacturing workshop at Woolwich Arsenal carried the distinct aroma of cutting lubricants and metallic dust particles suspended in the air. Engineering specialists stared intensely at a technical problem that seemed to defy conventional physics principles and established ballistics knowledge. How do you enable a 17-pounder cannon to pierce 200 millimeters of hardened armor plating without physically enlarging the weapon system itself? The solution resided entirely in mathematical calculations and material science. A full-caliber 76.2mm tungsten core proved excessively heavy for achieving maximum velocity. It couldn't reach the necessary speed required for deep penetration against sloped armor. However, a 50mm core wrapped securely within an aluminum shell matching the gun's bore diameter weighed approximately 50% less while maintaining structural integrity. Identical propellant charge amounts, but double the achievable velocity upon barrel exit. Muzzle velocity reached an astounding 1,200 meters per second, unprecedented for anti-tank weapons of that era. The sabot component itself represented genuine engineering poetry in motion. 3 aluminum petals surrounded the dense tungsten penetrator in a carefully balanced configuration. They needed to grip the rifling grooves perfectly, transfer rotational spin for stabilizing the projectile during flight, then separate cleanly mere milliseconds after exiting the barrel without interfering with the round's trajectory. If the petals separated prematurely while still inside the barrel, accuracy suffered dramatically. If separation occurred too late after barrel exit, aerodynamic drag destroyed velocity advantages completely. Early prototype testing during 1943 produced catastrophic failures that damaged equipment. The sabot pedals frequently clipped the muzzle brake assembly, causing damage to the gun's crown that affected accuracy. Subsequent shots fired with conventional ammunition became wildly inaccurate and unpredictable in their trajectories. Teams of specialized engineers visited tank regiment maintenance facilities carrying precision boring equipment, carefully enlarging muzzle brake apertures by fractions of millimeters to accommodate the separating sabot pedals. Factory production guns received modifications before delivery to combat units to prevent field failures. The tungsten core itself demanded specific manufacturing tolerances that were difficult to achieve consistently. Excessive hardness caused the penetrator to shatter upon impact with armor plate. Insufficient hardness allowed it to deform uselessly without penetrating. The optimal hardness existed within a narrow, acceptable range, specifically tungsten carbide combined with 6% cobalt binder material. Density measured 14.5 grams per cubic centimeter, nearly double the density of conventional steel alloys used in standard ammunition. At firing test ranges across Britain, gunners reported something completely unexpected during live fire exercises. When APDS rounds missed their intended targets, they kicked up almost no visible dirt or debris upon ground impact. The small penetrator barely disturbed the soil surface compared to conventional shells. For crews thoroughly accustomed to spotting fall of shot to correct their aiming point for follow-up rounds, this characteristic proved genuinely alarming and disorienting. You couldn't observe visually where your missed shot actually landed on the battlefield. Training protocols required complete revision and updating. Gunners learned to fire precious APDS rounds only when absolutely certain their first round would strike the target successfully. Otherwise, they'd waste irreplaceable tungsten that cost more than gold per kilogram. Each individual round represented months of tungsten mining operations, chemical processing, and precision machining using specialized equipment. And soon these revolutionary rounds would be desperately needed across European battlefields. Normandy, June 1944. Sherman Firefly Commander Sergeant Dusty Rhodes spotted the massive Tiger at 1,400 meters distance, its angular hull partially concealed behind a stone farmhouse wall. His gunner, Corporal Mitchell, possessed 3 APDS rounds loaded in his ready ammunition rack within easy reach. The remainder consisted of standard armor-piercing capped ballistic cap shells. APDS, Rhodes commanded through the intercom system. The round loaded with a distinctive metallic clicking sound, noticeably lighter than conventional shells in weight and handling. Mitchell centered his rangefinder reticle on the target. The Tiger hadn't detected their presence yet in the concealed position. One shot available, perhaps 2 maximum, before devastating return fire would certainly come. The 17-pounder cannon barked loudly. A massive yellow-brown flash erupted violently from the muzzle brake assembly. Mitchell never observed where the round actually impacted the target. No dirt spray materialized, no visible impact signature appeared, but the Tiger's turret stopped moving immediately. They'd either missed completely or achieved a killing hit, impossible to determine visually. The Tiger's engine note changed audibly. Smoke began pouring from hatches. The vehicle was reversing desperately. Crew members bailing out rapidly. Clean kill confirmed. This exact scene repeated itself across Normandy throughout July and August as British armor engaged German heavy tanks. British armored vehicle crews discovered APDS could penetrate Tigers at engagement ranges where German 88mm guns struggled to return accurate fire effectively. At 1,200 meters distance, a Firefly became absolutely deadly against heavy armor. The Tiger, meanwhile, required 800 meters or closer for reliable penetration of Sherman armor plating. But the revolutionary ammunition remained desperately scarce throughout frontline units. After-action reports noted crews conserving and using APDS exclusively against heavy armored targets, specifically Tigers, Panthers, and the occasional King Tiger encountered. Against Panzer Mark IVs or lighter vehicles, they conserved tungsten rounds carefully. Standard armor-piercing ballistic cap shells sufficed adequately for those lighter threats. German intelligence analysts noticed something deeply disturbing in captured British vehicles during battlefield recovery operations. Unknown ammunition types with peculiar aluminum components were discovered in abandoned Fireflies. Testing conducted at Hillersleben Proving Grounds revealed the penetration capability as genuinely alarming and strategically significant. The Wehrmacht possessed its own subcaliber rounds, specifically Panzer Granit 40 series, featuring tungsten cores for enhanced penetration. But during mid-1943, Albert Speer's armaments ministry banned all further production completely. Germany's tungsten supply, strangled effectively by Allied economic warfare and naval blockades, couldn't sustain both ammunition production and machine tool manufacturing simultaneously. Britain, possessing better access to tungsten through Portuguese colonial sources and African mining operations, continued producing APDS in increasing quantities. The strategic implication proved profound and far-reaching. Allied tank guns could now engage German heavy armor at previously impossible engagement ranges with high success rates. And German crews sitting behind supposedly impenetrable steel barriers were preparing to learn what genuine vulnerability actually felt like on the battlefield. Intelligence officers stationed at Wehrmacht headquarters reviewed incoming field reports with growing alarm and concern. British 17-pounder guns equipped with APDS could penetrate 256 millimeters of armor at 500 meters range under test conditions. Even the Tiger II's frontal plate, 150 millimeters thick and heavily sloped for deflection, wasn't secure beyond 1,000 meters engagement distance. Tactical doctrine required immediate changes across all armored units. German tank commanders received new standing orders distributed throughout combat formations. Maintain maximum engagement distance whenever possible. Avoid frontal confrontations with Fireflies under all circumstances. Identify them quickly through recognition of their longer gun barrel and different muzzle brake configuration. The Firefly's distinctively longer gun barrel and modified muzzle brake made visual recognition possible at considerable range for trained observers. Some resourceful German crews painted false muzzle brakes on standard Shermans to confuse British tankers about actual threat levels. British crews countered intelligently by disguising Firefly barrels with camouflage materials to resemble standard 75mm guns, creating a deadly game of visual deception and camouflage. Production statistics documented the strategic situation clearly. By September 1944, approximately 400 Sherman Fireflies operated throughout Northwest Europe theater. Each vehicle carried 77 rounds total ammunition storage capacity, but only 6 rounds were APDS initially. That meant roughly 2,400 APDS rounds existed in the entire European theater of operations. Contrast that limited number with German production capabilities. During mid-1943, only 5.8% of German anti-tank ammunition consisted of subcaliber armor-piercing composite rigid types. After tungsten production bans took effect, that percentage dropped to nearly zero by early 1944 across all units. The British Ministry of Supply meticulously documented each tungsten shipment arriving from global sources. Portuguese mines yielded critical supplies despite continuous German economic pressure and diplomatic threats. African colonial sources supplemented reserves adequately. American tungsten extracted from Colorado mines augmented British stocks significantly through lend-lease arrangements. Germany, meanwhile, rationed remaining tungsten exclusively for machine tools and precision manufacturing equipment. The lathes and milling machines that produced Panthers and Tigers themselves required tungsten carbide cutting edges for efficient production. Without precision tooling capabilities, tank production would collapse entirely within months. A brutal strategic choice emerged: manufacture bullets or maintain factories producing tanks. German planners chose factories and vehicle production. British and American forces chose both simultaneously through superior resource access and global supply chains. By February 1945, British armored units were routinely fielding 2 Sherman Fireflies per tank troop, effectively doubling earlier allocations across many combat formations. At the same time, APDS availability surged as production scaled up. Crews who once counted their subcaliber rounds carefully now reported carrying 10 to 15 per vehicle instead of roughly 6, which changed how aggressively they could fight. Wehrmacht intelligence summaries from early 1945 noted sharply rising Allied anti-tank lethality at most engagement ranges. Without fully grasping the driver behind it, APDS output had effectively tripled over the previous 6 months. The war was no longer being decided only by nerve and positioning. It was being decided by tungsten, metallurgical know-how, and the ability to turn scarce materials into repeatable battlefield effects. Inside a Tiger, Oberfeldwebel Museller studied a distant Sherman through the commander's optics. Range: about 1,300 meters, too far for confident hits on a moving target. He ordered the driver forward. The Maybach engine surged, hauling 57 tons across a hedgerow field with startling urgency. At 900 meters, Mueller judged they had reached a practical engagement window. Gunner Fisher steadied the crosshairs on the Sherman's hull. A standard 75-meter layout, no obvious long gun. On paper, no immediate threat at this distance under familiar doctrine. Fire. The world turned inside out. A violent punch tore through the turret's right side. No dramatic detonation, no rolling fireball, just the ripping sound of metal giving way and a hammer-like shock that slammed Mueller in the chest. Fisher's head snapped back. Blood sprayed across the fighting compartment. The projectile passed through him, through the turret interior, and out the opposite side, leaving a clean exit. The loader collapsed unconscious. The driver screamed into the intercom, panic rising with every syllable. Mueller's mind stalled on a single, impossible question. Where was the expected explosion? Where was the classic roar of an armor-piercing shell bursting inside the tank? Then the lower hull failed. The transmission shrieked, gears stripping instantly. Smoke poured up through the driver's compartment. "Bail out," Mueller shouted, forcing his hands to work while they trembled. He shoved the unconscious loader toward an escape hatch and clawed for daylight. Outside, the truth snapped into focus. The long barrel of a Firefly had been present all along. The crew had been watching a different Sherman, baited by a decoy. The Firefly had flanked them quietly and waited. In roughly 30 seconds, the Tiger went from fighting machine to burning wreck. No chance to answer with a shot. No time to reverse away. No margin for the familiar rhythm of tank combat, where warning, impact, and response formed a brutal sequence. Here, the penetration seemed to arrive before sound itself could catch up. Mueller only truly registered the hits after Fisher was already dead. To survivors, it felt like execution. The tungsten penetrator had chewed through about 80 mm of side armor as if it were laminated wood. Mueller had lived through more than 100 engagements in the same Tiger against T-34s and Shermans, and none had erased his tank in half a minute. This was not the old contest of thickness versus caliber. It was physics applied with clinical efficiency. Traditional armor-piercing shells depended on mass and explosive filler. An 88mm German APCBC round weighed roughly 10.2 kg. When it penetrated, its explosive charge detonated inside the target, amplifying destruction through blast, spall, and shock. APDS operated on a different logic. Pure kinetic energy delivered by a small, ultra-dense core traveling at extreme velocity. In British 17-pounder APDS, the tungsten penetrator was about 50 mm in diameter and around 3.5 kilobits, carried in an aluminum sabot that discarded after leaving the muzzle. Velocity, not bulk, was the point. Kinetic energy follows the relationship Ke/1/2 Even though the penetrator was far lighter than a full-bore shell, its far higher velocity meant it could carry comparable, often greater, energy at the muzzle. The square of velocity changes everything. On impact, tungsten carbide struck armor so fast that both penetrator and steel behaved less like rigid solids and more like flowing material. The effect was not drilling in the everyday sense. It was a pressure-driven failure, a localized collapse of structure under immense stress. Metallurgical examinations of penetrated armor plates revealed telling signatures. Entry holes could measure slightly larger than the core due to displacement and deformation. Exit holes sometimes narrowed, with directional tearing and distortion patterns suggesting yaw and tumbling after breakthrough. Contrary to some simplified accounts, APDS still produced spalling and secondary fragments, but in a different pattern. The core frequently fractured or disintegrated after penetration, spraying a cone of high-velocity fragments through the fighting compartment. Those fragments ricocheted violently, killing crew and shredding equipment in a way that felt instantaneous. British trials against captured heavy tanks documented the advantage in numbers. 17-pounder APDS was credited with approximately 256 mm of penetration at 500 meters at 30 degrees obliquity, and about 233 mm west or 1,000 meters at the same angle. By comparison, the German 88 mm L56 APCBC figures were far lower under similar test conditions, around 165 mm at 500 meters at 30 degrees. In practical terms, it meant British crews could defeat armor that German doctrine had treated as functionally immune, and do so at ranges where return fire was uncertain. Early APDS batches had drawbacks, including accuracy problems linked to muzzle brake effects and occasional projectile instability. Engineering changes reduced these issues, and by late 1944, reliability improved enough that crews trusted the round. Once it worked consistently, there was no negotiation with the outcome. Armor theory had to bend to metallurgy and velocity. The psychological impact was as decisive as the penetration. Conventional tank combat offered cues, muzzle flashes, whistling approach, the hammering concussion of impact. APDS removed many of those signals. Survivors described rounds that simply appeared inside the tank, with death arriving before the brain could place the threat. Some Firefly crews reported an uneasy sense of imbalance, describing kills as disturbingly one-sided. German morale reports from late 1944 noted increased abandonment, with heavy tanks found intact but empty after encounters where crews believed they faced weapons they could not counter. German engineers examined captured rounds with a mix of admiration and frustration. The sabot concept was elegant. The tungsten core was machined to tight tolerances. Countermeasures were grim. Thicker armor was impractical. A Tiger was already near the limits of bridges, roads, and recovery capability. Building a German equivalent was constrained by tungsten scarcity, which had been biting since 1943 and was often diverted toward machine tools to keep production lines running. Tactical adaptation remained the only viable response, with guidance pushing crews toward longer engagement ranges where APDS accuracy and effectiveness could drop. Post-war testing sharpened the final lesson. Trials against captured King Tigers suggested that 17-pounder APDS could threaten even the frontal armor at substantial ranges, undermining the aura of invulnerability around Germany's heaviest designs. The broader legacy carried forward. Modern APFSDS rounds are direct descendants of APDS logic, refined through stabilizing fins, improved sabots, and denser penetrator materials. The principle never changed. A small, dense dart moving extremely fast turns mass times velocity squared into battlefield certainty. What began as a desperate wartime solution became the foundation of armored lethality for the next 80 years.